Welcome back to The Author's Edge. I'm your host, Allison Lane, and I am here for you. I'm so glad you're showing up for yourself and making time to make yourself a better marketer for your own being and for the book that you meant to write 10 years ago, but you wrote now, or the book that you're just starting to figure out what does it want to be? Or if you're on your eighth book, it doesn't matter. We all need to be better marketers of ourselves and also the books we're writing. So you're in the right place. Sit back wherever you are, probably in the Target parking lot, because that's where I listen to the podcasts that I have time to. And let me dive in, because today I'm so happy to welcome Dr. Tara Cousineau to the show. She's a clinical psychologist, a meditation teacher. She is yoga-rific, and she helps high achievers let go of perfectionism and step into the opportunity they have to do the thing that they always wanted to do, but with confidence and joy. Who doesn't want that? She's also a psychologist at Harvard's counseling and mental health services. She's has her own private practice. Her new book also is The Perfectionist Dilemma: Learn the Art of Self-Compassion and Become a Happy Achiever. This book is so good. You'll hear during the interview how it has changed me and what the changes I've made to even my schedule are. I can't wait to hear how you are changed when you read it too. You'll see all the links for her book and the book she recommends and all the things we talk about in the show notes. But let's now dive in. Welcome, Dr. Tara Cousineau. We're both in the afterglow of your book launch event at the Harvard bookstore called The Coop, which I thought was co-op, but then I got corrected by a client who's written 22 books. And he was like, no, it's The Coop, Allison. And I was like, oh, okay. I'm so not an insider. But now I am. Now I'm in the inner circle. So congratulations on your book launch of this amazing thing, The Perfectionist Dilemma. And I keep telling you how much you've helped me already. And this baby's only been out for a couple weeks, but the subtitle says it all to me. The Learn the Art of Self-Compassion and Become a Happy Achiever. As a high achiever and a perfectionist myself, like I do want to still achieve, but I don't want to feel the weight of the guilt of which I think we always do of, but you didn't do all this other stuff. And that's what we focus on. And I want to be able to celebrate everything that I am doing, but also that I want other people. So for those listening in who are just as busy as you are with working full time and serving patients or teaching students, or because listeners, I know that you're listening in the car on your way somewhere because you're trying to fit this in. I want to ask you, Dr. Tara, about all those high achievers out there who are probably making some common mistakes when it comes to looking at their own success. So let's just kick off by you helping us understand what are those common mistakes. And you can use me as an example if you want to.
Okay, thanks for having me. First of all, it's an excellent question to start with because I literally just had our consult with someone who has achieved a great deal in her young life. And I had her previously passed. You accomplish your degree. When that happens, stay with it. Stay with it longer than you might. Because people who are high achieving, they reach this goal and then they're on to the next thing. And they don't actually absorb or metabolize or integrate that they had this huge milestone. And it makes me sad, actually, is that they're not actually appreciating their own successes or their own efforts. They're on to the next thing. And it's a tricky part of I think, of the mind that we get into that trap.
I want to just breathe through it because I'm thinking, we all do that. But why do we do that? Every woman I know is quick to say, oh, thanks. But what I really needed to do was this. Where does that come from? We can't even take a compliment.
Exactly. Well, that comes from conditioning. And for girls and women, it's very much a part of how we need to continually prove ourselves over and over again in order to achieve some sort of status or ideal, whether it in a career, job, partner, looks, appearance, friendships you live. And it's our fault, actually. It's not, and this is for men too, if they're listening, it's not your fault. We are steeped in a culture, a stew of materialism and consumerism. Bars keep getting raised or to the point where you actually burnt out and people figure it out.
Yeah. They burn themselves out and then they have to take time because sometimes they're like, I'm just going to take the weekend. Oh, go crazy.
Right. As if 48 really going to help you of a
Yeah.
lifetime.
Right. Or they have to take a step back because they're like, no, my health is suffering. But
Right.
what I really see is women who are high achieving and men too, but high achieving and they achieve the thing that they thought they always wanted. They're at the height of their industry or their field. And then not only have they achieved it, but then they fizzle out because then what? Like they've been a perfectionist their whole lives. They've been a high achieving. They've beat themselves up. They haven't savored anything. They get to the top and they're like, it's not like want want, but it is what else is going to drive you if there's nothing else to drive you because they've been letting external forces dictate what their success was. And we were talking about this a little offline last night after your book event. And I just find that resonating with me as somebody who reached heights in my first 25 years, or even my first 10 years. I was considered a rising star and then as a superstar, then whatever. But I never celebrated it. I always thought, oh, I'm just little old me from rural Maryland. With my Maryland accent, I can't even say rural. It's hard. But then we achieve these heights. And particularly for writers who oftentimes they are at the top of their field, but they don't know the path to writing a book because it wasn't part of their career path. And so as I'm on this campaign for everyone to think bigger about the ripple effect they can have in the world, I really want you to speak to the person who's achieved the thing they thought they would achieve, but they have more to give. So how do we unlock that?
Unlocking is a good word. I think happens, at least in experience in working with high achievers, is actually our nervous systems habituate to the constant achievement. We don't even know what it feels like to take a pause or take a rest or savor. And we actually disconnect sometimes from the feelings, from the meaning, the purpose that got you started in the first place. I always want people to recognize that their value has been in their effort all along, and it's not about what's on the outside, it's what's in the inside. And that gets obscured with being on this treadmill of succeeding. When it's to like easy for me to write 2 books, I struggled with that. I didn't think I was good enough. Who did I think I was? Did what I have to write, did it even matter? Like, what would I say that would be any different than somebody else who's in my field? Then the comparing mind settles in. And we can't help the comparing mind either because that is actually how our brain operates. But when we start to negatively compare ourselves to ideals who have made these strides in life, we actually don't know their backstory, which is probably 25 years of really hard work also. So we forget that things actually don't happen magically. There are these ideals out there, and we might be comparing ourselves to the wrong step trajectory. Like, how do you get started on something without being perfect, without having it all figured out? And that actually really is a practice of self-compassion, to go back to the subtitle of my book, is you have to actually really be kind to yourself along the way, because you're doing something that might be new. You might feel like an imposter. Those are the thoughts that often arise. And to remind yourself that, right, I'm actually doing something new. It's okay to be a beginner. And I think high achievers don't like being beginners. They like,
High achievers want to, they might be a beginner, but they want an A plus out of the gate. And they like all their ducks to be in a row as well. And so that's why we see procrastinating and procrastinating to get prepared, which is the worst kind of preparing. I'm organizing so that I'll be organized when. Oh my God, let's just do it. Lord, have mercy. No. And high achievers, they oftentimes they think that they have to earn the right to do the next thing. Is what I notice. This is what you'll have to talk me through this. But when they do break out, unlock their imagined perceived next step of, I'm going to speak at a conference that's not an industry conference, but it's like a global conference. And they realize, oh, this was available all along. But there's just no like hierarchical step to that. So you really have to unlock your own potential so that you can go for the thing that no one has invited you to, but the invitation is universal. It's ubiquitous. It's available to everyone. So like for you, I'm sure you have colleagues who have not written a book. You decided to write a book. So good on you. That's my point, is you're an expert in your field. You're a psychologist at the Harvard Counseling Center, and you have your own private practice, and you wrote a book because you decided you were going to do that. You didn't wait for someone to say, you've achieved enough, it's now time. So I want to help other people unlock that.
be told that to write my first book, which was on kindness, I mean, not like a top heavy topic, but I had a really important meaning behind it that kind of got my butt in the chair actually to begin writing. That was that it actually wasn't about me, that the book was actually a message for daughters, for people in the community. So I kind of take my self ego out of it and remind myself I have an opinion, of a perspective, of something that I share, and I'm just the channel for it. And there might be other people who have a similar message, and they're the channel, their version of the message. I have my version. So I had to kind of the script literally internally. It wasn't about, am I going to do this right? It's even important. Who do I think I am? And just wait a minute. I think that I want to share. And made it personal in so I wanted to leave something behind for my daughters. Because I thought, oh, I could drop dead tomorrow.
Jeez.
No,
okay.
a good practice. Like in mindfulness circles, it's actually a good practice. If this was your moment, if this was your day, if this is your week, how would you spend your life? I'll tell you what, you wouldn't be looking at your to-do list. You would be connecting with people. You would be appreciating people. You'd be doing kind and generous acts. So you guys were in high school or coming to the end of high school. It was a crazy busy time in our household. And I was like, okay, but the world was really mean. Daughter got beaten up. And there was like crazy things that were happening. I was like, wait a minute, what happened to kindness? And that's what got my first book started. I was like, I want to look into this a little bit deeper. With the perfectionist dilemma that just came out, I had been working with emerging adults, young people, have been high achievers, like literally for 18 years. 18 years, and here they are, and now they have got all this imposter syndrome happening. Or really hard on themselves, like internalizing this constant message that you have to keep working hard, you have to prove yourself constantly, which is when I was like, I got to actually do something. I got to help these people because I was actually in the same exact position when I was getting my PhD. So I thought, okay, the perfectionists have such great intentions. They want to do good things in the world. They want to be productive, some sense of really wonderful agency, and then they beat themselves up.
Yeah.
Like that's the dilemma. And then they suffer So, in all of these wonderful things that they want to do and the new learning and making some waves in the world, they beat themselves up along the way. Oh my gosh, can you do that without the suffering? So, that was the impetus for the perfectionist dilemma, is that we don't want to get rid of that striving for excellence, like that important value. It's feel like you're doing quality, meaningful work in the world, but you don't need to suffer to do it.
I'm so moved by that. I feel like everyone needs to hear that feeling that you should have achieved something already is such a way to beat yourself up, especially when you have so much value to provide, so much wisdom and kindness to pass on. And what I find about nonfiction authors is that they're driven to help. It's never, oh, I want to put my stamp on the world. Like that, look at my fist. For those of you not watching on YouTube, put your stamp on the world. It looks like you're going to punch the world. That is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about offering something with open hands. Like you are offering knowledge and perspective and lessons and steps that people can interpret as their own. But Dr. Tara, if you hadn't written these two books, that would all still be in your noggin and only known by the people who see you professionally and by your peers. And it's too small a circle. Expanding your ripple effect is what I'm talking about. The good knock-on effect that you can have is so much larger when you write a book. Now let me ask this other question, which is about how in a world that glorifies hustle culture and perfection, which is just anything I do, the speed of light is actually not perfect. It's always messy and not great. But what is a big shift you've seen recently in the way that people approach their own mental health and growth in that type of, maybe it's a old, I don't know if it's an old perspective, but hustle or your side hustle, or you've got to do something, but it has to be perfect out of the gate. Have you seen a shift? God, I hope you have. Please say yes.
No, I'm going to say yes. And the reason
Oh,
why I see the shift, there's no yes but here, but and the reason is because I'm in almost a privileged situation of being a clinical psychologist, that people come to me because they've had this first step of self-awareness. Something has happened in their life where they recognize that they need to make a shift. They might not know how exactly, but they've had that awareness. With high achievers, often, and with perfectionists in particular, that moment of self-awareness is often because their body has shut down. They've gotten an illness. Me, it was like, TMJ. I thought I was having nerve pain in my face. I didn't know where that was coming from. I was,
wow.
32 years old maybe at the time. That I couldn't tell it to myself, but my body did. And then I had to figure out why. And the why was because I was on this sort of that Brene Brown thing, like hustling for worthiness, right? That we get on this treadmill of doing and achieving. And then if we feel productive, it means we're worthy. And so we have to notice that we've been on this productivity treadmill and have exhausted ourselves, that we're not even enjoying what we're doing anymore. So that is also when people come to me, they're like, I don't think I'm even enjoying this anymore. And that's a really important moment of recognition to start to make some shifts in your life. And they don't have to be huge ones. They can be small, consistent, subtle shifts to get back into some balance, or maybe just cultivate balance for the first time in your life.
Yeah. Those small, what seems like a small shift, but I told you, and I keep telling people that I read your book and I was like, oh my gosh, I am always, no matter where I am, I'm always prepared to do two other things if there's even a gap in my attention. Like I've got podcasts queued up and I've got my laptop with me and my go bag which, why do I need a go bag? Allison. So you made me notice that I was going. And when I allowed myself time to drive around and not have a podcast on it and actually enjoy the radio silence, so that I was like, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. And I was able to observe that there were things on my to-do list that were never going to get done, that weren't interesting or important or urgent. And I could only do that once I gave myself space, which I had to force myself to take my pile of sticky notes and write them all out in one notebook so I could see them all side by side, because I had been carrying around a stack of sticky notes that were all scribbled on for 2 months.
So I wonder, and we're not doing any therapy here.
Come on, this is why I do this.
Here's my definition of perfectionism. And whether it's productivity or workaholism, you can give it whatever label you want. But the way that I have come around to defining perfectionism is that it's the paradox created by the need for belonging, or the converse, the fear of rejection, paired with unrealistic expectations for achievement and approval that sap your energy or life force. So
Yeah.
that's what I'm hearing from you, is that, that filling time gap with something to do is really sort of the way that your system, your mind, body, heart system is trying to make yourself feel important or worthy or responsible. You've got family to take care of. And at the same time, it's going to sap your energy or life force. And people will say, well, that's a little bit out there. I'm like, that's why people come in, is because their energy is gone. It's like they've just burned the candle at both ends. And that's that awareness step. It's like, I'm burning the candle at both ends. It's just too hard. And now I want to write a book. Who do I am? Because what happens is, when you don't recognize that you're having this sort of experience of depletion, is the inner critics will storm right in with, yeah, who do you think you are? Then we have to be really mindful that we have inner critical narratives that will fill in the space, and then we'll sabotage.
Yeah. That inner critic is something that I witness a lot in working with women, particularly, is that they know that other people see them as an expert. And then they finally find me and they say, am I crazy? Is anyone even going to be interested in this book idea? And what I always say is, first of all, you are a big effing deal. And if you're someone who has found this podcast, you also are a big effing deal, because there are a ton of, you can find your inner writer podcasts, and those have their place. But this podcast is about getting some poo done. And if you're writing nonfiction and you are an expert in your field and you feel called to write, for sure you should be writing. But their first question is, I feel like I should be doing this, but is anybody even going to care? Because I'm not the expert. And they'll give me all the reasons why, which is so sad, but they think that they're not the cat's pajamas, and they are.
Yeah, but Allison, I was exactly in that situation in 2016, 2017, that I was like, who did I have enough experience or knowledge? And I remember sitting with a friend colleague for lunch one day, and I said, this is my idea. And I had almost exactly what you just said. Am I crazy to think that I could actually write an interesting book about kindness? Like, isn't it just a no-brainer in life? And she just turned to me and she said, Tara, this is your story. It's your version, and it matters. And it was that little, I was like, yeah, it's your version of it that really helped me kind of get unlocked. Like, okay, something about this, and it might seem like but you know what? I bet there is some science about it. Let me go look into it. And that really helped shift things. That's what I tell people now. I mean, everyone's got a story, first of all. And many people will say, yeah, I should write a book about this. And I'm like, why don't you? Like, what would stop you? And that's where the inner critics, I mean, it's so interesting, because I have identified inner critics in all the storytelling that I've heard from people sitting across from me, there might be that inner judge, right? That maybe is, who do you think you are? Or there might be the inner bully that says, you can't do this. You're not up for it. Unless you're working your ass off, this is never going to happen, right? It's that harsh inner bully. Might be the doom scroller, right? The detective who just has to research everything. You had mentioned that at the beginning, like constant, like doing before you even get started. You have to leave no stone unturned until you're ready. And then there's the right there. I work with a lot of those people, by the way, because they're researchers by nature and they can't help but research. You know, at some point you have to say, no more research.
They research and then they need other people to validate
Yeah.
because they're used to peer reviewed publications.
Yeah, there's a lot of scrutiny. So they have to get everything right or precise. And so they have to keep going over things over and over again. It is, wow, really a challenge to break out of that sort of internal algorithm that's just cultivated over time. And then there's the nitpicker that has to have everything nice and neat, like you were saying, oh, the sticky notes and the post-it notes and getting organized. Like I definitely have a very loud inner nitpicker. And even today I was like, oh my gosh, I've got 5 hours of clients. I'm doing this podcast with Allison. My desk is a mess. I need to clean it up and I'm not going to feel clear or energetically available unless I do, right? I just create more of a mess actually is what happens because I'm in a rush.
Yeah.
And there's that one part that I think is there for many high achievers, which is that, which was named by a student of mine, her inner joy thief. And I told her I was adopting that as an archetype because there's so many people who do not allow themselves to relax, rest, play, find that space where actually that space is the birthplace of creativity. We don't let ourselves to, give those little pauses that we need. So we have to ourselves and then not try to get rid of those parts. We have to understand them.
Yeah. Because the thing that you think is a no-brainer is mind-blowing to everyone else. The thing you think is obvious, just in general, if you're listening and you think, doesn't everybody know about kindness? Doesn't everybody know about gratefulness? Doesn't everybody know about how to pitch their book? Which I thought, as a career marketer and publicist, like pitching any idea has to do with the receiver, not the, isn't this a good idea? But what is no, nobody knows the thing that you think is obvious. I'm just thinking of all the authors I work with. They're all ask the same questions. Isn't this obvious? Hasn't this been done before? No, it hasn't. It hasn't been done from your perspective by you in this time, which is also different. Like the thing that you can't control is now versus a year ago. And nobody knows the book that you think is the end all be all book on the topic that you think that everybody already has that book. I've never heard of that book. And that's always the case. I love pointing out, I've never read Julia Cameron's book on being a writer and going, yeah, there are plenty of books that if you're an expert, you think, oh, it's already been done because everybody knows that. No, they don't. There's always room in people's hearts. And also, even if they do know about whatever the other book is that you as the author think is the thing. What if they don't connect with that author? Because it's not just the book, but they have to trust the voice that's providing it.
Yeah, I always say there's somebody for everybody. You just have to find who that somebody is. So keep putting yourself out there because your story matters, you tell it matters, and your energy and the love that you have to give to the world matters. And it's a big universe. I mean, there's 8 billion people in the world. There is going to be an audience for what you have to say. And I have to remind myself this constantly. Like, I do not have this down pat. So this is where I go back to like a book in The Perfectionist Dilemma is I thought, okay, people want a recipe for it. So I call it the evolve method. It really begins actually with being present to your own life because we get so hung up in everything that we actually aren't present to our life. And to validate how we're feeling, because another thing that high achievers and perfectionists who have like strong inner critics or inner bullies, they actually are so in control, they don't even allow themselves to feel. So sometimes I feel like, oh my gosh, we have to do some real training and empathy towards ourselves. And then to really befriend those that imposter feelings, to befriend the inner critics, because they're there because they are protecting you from some perceived danger, like a threat in the world that you're going to get exposed or shamed in some way. It comes from a story long ago. Let's help that part heal. Let's help that part up to say, no, you have arrived right now in this moment. So we really need to tend to those inner critical voices and not be mad at ourselves and not just, because if we could just do it, we would. But there are things
Yeah.
that get in the way. And we need to take that step back and create the space and the community to allow yourself to grow and do these harder things in your life. To be a beginner. Be glad to be a beginner in something new.
I was going to ask you that what's a popular tactic that doesn't work anymore, but I think you just hit it. It's the just surround yourself with people who are doing it and you do it too. But that never works because somebody is always carrying that weight of, I don't belong here. Or you do have to address the thing that's keeping you from enjoying the time or pursuing the goal.
Yeah, mentality or no pain, no gain, or grin and bear it. Like those sort of edicts that are in our culture are really problematic because if we could, we would, but we don't because there's something else that's underneath the mindset, right? Simply this mindset shift of scarcity to abundance or mindset to a growth mindset. You really kind of look at the block that's stopping you from doing something that intellectually you understand. Like, we're not dumb. Like, we get it. Like, just do it. Just go start that online course. I've been saying that to myself for a year. So that's my just do it this year, but it's really hard. So I need to understand, like, what's the block there? And treat it kindly with curiosity and then figure out, well, maybe what I need is community. Maybe what I need is help. Maybe it's not about just knowing how to do everything from the get-go and just dive right in without really having a safety net for yourself. And so that's where that self-compassion piece comes in again, is like self-compassion really is your own safety net for your really protecting your inner worth, your inner sense of self. And we don't often give ourselves the safety net. And that comes in relationship to ourselves and those parts that are scared, relationship with other people who may know just a little bit more than us. Doesn't have to be the top expert in the world, but maybe someone who's 10% ahead of you. Talk to that person, get that kind of support, which is what you provide actually in some of your programs, Allison.
Right. It's intended because so many women I work with are like you. They're completely busy and they don't think they have time because they are not sure they're going to get a benefit out of something that they have to devote an hour a month to. But because I'm the glue in the Next Chapter Network, which is a network of high achieving women who are all doing the things, speakers, writers, media contributors, authors, they're all doing a profession as well. They're not just speakers, but they're speakers because they teach at the university or they're seeing patients or they're memoirists sharing a really important experience and insight. But if they're not together, they don't have the opportunity for the unexpected learning and the unanticipated surprise collaboration because and that's why I love the network is because when I see you folks together, I'm like, oh, you wouldn't even know to get introduced, but I've got to make the introduction because there's something that's cool there. But it only takes a minute for me to say, Dr. Tara, you need to know so and so because you're both this interest in mind, but you wouldn't necessarily know that unless someone made the intro and you made time for it. I'm so glad. I'm so glad that we're talking about it.
Yeah, I think, just to say one thing about that piece is so what you're creating in your community and what women can find communities in their own other ways is that you can't learn or do something new if you're playing it safe. But you also can't do it if you're overwhelmed because that shuts down motivation. But if you can find places where you feel safely challenged, that's when I think all the good stuff happens. Is you have to feel safe enough and comfortable that you can take those steps forward. And really, it's just like a toddler, right? Parents are going to make sure that the glass coffee tables are covered and protected. But you let that child roam around, fall on his little, and then stand back up. We all need to be safely challenged in those kinds of ways. And that's, I think, where the thriving really happens versus being in that survival mode, which is overwhelm. So when we're in overwhelm, we're pretty much hustling for worthiness. We're in that survival zone and we're not really thriving. And when we're safe, we're too complacent, right? And more, maybe almost more avoidance. And that's not going to get us any farther. So we had to kind of that sort of nice sort of spot of being safely challenged. And I think writing groups are a wonderful place to do that because you're hearing other people who might be at the beginning, or maybe they're a little bit farther than you, or they've already done one thing already, and then they become this amazing resource for you to kind of stay in your own really internal motivation.
There's always something, I think, good that can come out of community, but you have to show up for it. You have to make space for it.
Community, and
sometimes it does have to be the right.
You have to do the little Goldilocks thing.
Yeah, right.
Right. Is this one right, or is this one right? But
right.
You know it because it's an internal feeling like. It's like a feeling of relief, like, oh my gosh, this is the right place for me.
Right. Dr. Tara, let me pivot and ask you for a book reco. What is a book that you want to share today?
Oh my gosh, this past year I read a couple of really good books. I think my favorite one, though, it's a book of fiction, and it's called Wayward, and it's spelled Weyward, which actually has like a meaning, but you have to read the book for it. But it's by Amelia Hart, about really kind of like witches in a way, or energy healers that go back, a couple centuries, and this sort of family line of having this gift of intuition and healing, sort of the drama that happens along the way. Interested in energy psychology and energy medicine. So I love any stories that are about these unappreciated gifts of nature, especially for women who are intuitive and have these sort of intuitive powers of healing. It was a great read, and it was like cross generations, and I love this. And it brought
I'm going to put the link in the show notes. This is my next read. I cannot wait.
Yeah, I loved it. I don't know when the book came out, but I saw a description.
I think it was 2023.
Maybe.
I think it was pretty recently.
Yeah, fun read, and I really enjoyed it. I would read it a second time.
Wow, that's high praise.
I know.
Okay, we will put your book link in the show notes, put Wayward in the show notes. If you want to join, we would love to have you. And before we call this podcast complete, Dr. Tara, what is one thing you want to leave people with?
I just want to let people know that they are worthy of love and belonging, and that their story matters, and we need to hear it. And if we hear it, we are being deprived. So please share your stories with the world.
Oh, perfect. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you, listener. Wherever you are, sitting in carpool, I know you are, because that is my life too. We're so glad you're showing up for yourself and sharing this. Do your friends a solid. If this podcast, someone who needs to hear Dr. Tara's message, stop right now, put your car in park, make sure you're not going to roll over a elementary school kid, and share it. Just send it to someone who needs it, because the way that we can help people is to share what we know. Otherwise, they're never going to know, and you're never going to remember later. So do it now. It helps people also find us when you leave a review. Leave a 5-star review. It helps the algorithm and the infrastructure and the matrix show the podcast to people who need it. So thank you. I will see you next week.